Niels PAGH Andersen edition, or editor, for example. So first question, I hope I got all those words right. Good afternoon, congratulations for the film, by the way. I would like to, well, I'm going to ask two questions, if you'll allow me. The first is, I'd like to know, George Mackay represents all of the cast, but I would like to know, in one of the musical numbers of the films, one of them was perhaps especially complicated to do, or did everything run fluidly and there was no problem? And I would like to talk about lighting as well in the film, because what drew my attention quite a lot were the different rooms of the underground compound. And for example, there are different lighting, especially I saw it at the end because they go through all of the different rooms and the light changes in the different rooms. As I see that, that's very important. I would like to know the work behind all of that technical side of things. Okay, hope you got those questions.
Do you want to start first? Okay. The songs. Whoa, hold on. The songs are, I think, exquisitely beautiful that Joshua Schmidt composed, and they are also impressively complicated to sing. They're not easy sings. Tilda's song, The Mirror, the one she sings in the bathroom, has to be just about one of the hardest songs in the musical repertoire. The song, The Big Blue Sky, that the father sings where he falls off the mountain or jumps off the mountain, that the range required is, we thought, impossible for any singer. Michael was able to handle it. Alone is incredibly hard, and I'll let George talk to the challenges there from a performance perspective, but everyone was so intrepid and just embraced the idea of singing. I don't think the singing put any of the cast off for a second. It was just something that it was something that everyone threw their hearts into and learned. It was one thing I'll just say about the songs. It was very important to me that when Mother sings, we don't hear some switch to some super polished Broadway style voice. It was very important to me that Mother sing in her own voice, because, and the same for all the characters, these songs are emotional breakdowns very often, and they have to be deeply rooted in the character and in the moment. I'll let George talk a little bit about the singing, and then I'll answer your question about the lights.
Yeah, the singing was one of the great challenges about being part of this production, and we had the most amazing music team of Marius de Vries, our music producer, Josh Schmidt, our composer, Fiora Cutler, our singing teacher, and Mark and Shelley and Paulina, so many wonderful people to work with and help us. And actually for the song, sort of Sun's song alone, that's how Josh and I first began working together. We did like a 2-day workshop to just explore the character via that song. So there was the technical aspect of it, but then there was also that became the route to understanding the character for me personally.
And then about the lighting, one of the crucial ideas that Jette and I and Michał Krichman, the cinematographer, worked out was that we should forget that we're in a bunker at times, because part of this, the characters sing their hopes, they sing their delusions, they sing their lies, they sing the stories that they tell themselves so that they can cope with their situation. And it was crucial to me that those lies and hopes and delusions be beautiful and seductive, so that when we hear them, we're humming along with them and, in a sense, slipping into their skin and swept up into the beauty of the lie with them. And that meant we should be able to forget that we're in a bunker. We shouldn't feel we're in a claustrophobic concrete box like in a film like Downfall. So we had to think, how do we do that when there's no windows? And the idea was light coming through skylights. Jette had a whole series of inspirations for that, and simulated daylight, and then that then diffuses through the rooms. And then Misha developed with our amazing gaffer, James McGuire, an idea that as sort of time speeds up, and especially in songs about the natural world, of which there's quite a few, the nostalgia or the longing is the right word for the natural world, that we would have this alternating warm and cold light simulating or approximating what happens as clouds race overhead and change daylight from warm to cold. And then, of course, there's moments where the light goes down entirely.
Hay una pregunta ahí atrás.
Hi, question here from Brazil, Rodrigo Fonseca, Correio da Manhã. Congratulations for the film. Joshua, I think I have two questions. You became admired as a documentary filmmaker, and when we talk about the kind of documentary you've made, the art of listening came instantaneously to our mind. I would like to understand how much of this previous experience of yours were important to build the listening of a family. That's the core of the end. And I think I have a second question. It's a musical basically about loneliness. You have a family together, people trying to love, but there is loneliness everywhere. How much of this loneliness reflects the current situation of America, the current situation of a world full of social media and empty of the look in the eyes? Thank you very much.
I deeply appreciate the second part of your question. It was insightful, and it cuts to the core of what the film's about, and it has an urgency to it that I can just speak to for a moment. I think we live in a society, we live in an economy that tells us we should be greedy, essentially. We are told that a good agent in a capitalist economy is one trying to maximize their own profit, one maximizing their own self-interest. All economic models assume that that's who we are. And the cradle, if you like, of the rationally self-interested, greedy individual is the nuclear family, and we're told we should find all our meaning there. And we live, and when we place all our hopes on a notion of family that's defined through the exclusion of the rest of the human family, and likewise, when as people in Spain and Western Europe, and I come from America, we define ourselves and our communities through our nations, our nation states, through the countries we're from, to the exclusion of people in other countries, across borders, whom we knowingly immiserate and at the same time depend on to clothe us, to produce our food, to mine the rare metals in our mobile phones. And we exclude them and we block them out from our consciousness. We place ourselves willingly, habitually, each and every day in a bunker just like the family's bunker. And I think this film is set in the future, but as George said this morning in a conversation, it's about our present. It's about what we're doing now in the present as a human community and in our individual families, which, if we do not change, will lead to this future. So it's at once a cautionary tale and an allegory for right now. The issue of listening was also a beautiful question. I'll just say this about it. I think, I'm not sure I fully understood it, but I feel that like the act of killing, like the look of silence, the end is a meditation on storytelling. It's a film about how we create our worlds, create our relationships, create our values through the stories we tell, which means that no story is neutral. Every story has an effect. It's about how the film is, all three of these films are about how we obscure the world from ourselves, how we obscure ourselves from ourselves, how we make up and cling to excuses to ease our regrets, and how we somehow manage to believe those excuses, which is to say, it's about self-deception and the uniquely human ability to lie to ourselves. Other creatures may lie, like birds will pretend to have a broken wing, but I think only we human beings lie to ourselves. And I think there's an art of listening to my film, it's about watching, and something, George, you were also talking about this morning, watching how very closely for those sort of tics and moments of discomfort when the truth pierces through those lies and starts to unravel them. And I think what's George's performance in the end is a masterclass in precision, because every time any mention of anything that might pique Sun's longing takes place, there's a little flicker, there's a little twitch. And it's all, I don't think it was just me listening, it was all of us as a team listening to really the truth that screams through silence when we attend to it closely.
¿Una pregunta?
Enhorabuena.
Hi, congratulations. Joshua, actors, whether it was very clear who was going to portray the roles. Who was going to portray the roles? Was it clear to you, Joshua? George, what was important for you to accept the character? Joshua, she was just saying, you didn't have the headphones on. That's okay. Whether you'd already chosen the people that were going to portray, the actors and actresses that were going to portray the roles. Did you have that in mind already beforehand, or did you decide subsequently? And George, what was the most...
When I was writing the
Why did you accept it, basically, at the end of the day?
And when I was writing the script?
When you were writing the script, that's right, yes.
I didn't have the cast in mind while I was writing the initial drafts of the script because, in fact, because it's a musical, when you need the songs, you're very restricted in how you can edit the songs once they're in place. So we had to intensively I had to workshop the script with actors where I was living in Copenhagen in order to test how the songs were placed. Now, all of that could be refined in rehearsal and even on set, but that meant that I was actually developing the script with other actors who I knew would not play the roles. But as soon as we had a script that I thought was right, I knew that the mother should be Tilda. And I reached out to Tilda, she read the script. We had this one beautiful phone call where she said, yes, of course we're doing this. And then we decided to approach the rest of the casting like that fairy tale challenge, knowing that whoever says yes is just the right person for it. George was the second person I went to. I just fell in love with your work the moment I saw 1917, but then when I saw you play a related role, related in the sense that you grow up in total isolation in Captain Fantastic, and your face flickers with this precision, with every doubt and realization. I knew this has to be our son. And then, yeah.
And then it was my pleasure to be a part of it. And when Josh got in touch, it was an amalgamation of the script itself and what it was looking at, the sort of accuracy and the nuance of the theme at its core. And then that it was going to be Josh who was going to be leading us, given the way that he's looked and studied at this theme and excavated this theme in his previous work so extraordinarily. And then with the script came this incredible document that articulated Josh's vision so profoundly, and also the reason for it being a musical, which, of course, in a sort of acting learning experience is one sort of joyous reason to jump in, but it also spoke to Josh's accuracy in his vision, the reason that he'd chosen specifically to make it a musical. So all of those reasons combined is why I wanted to be part of it.
Medina, Mundo Cine.
Mundo Cine.
In a time in which many musical films such as Wonka, Mean Girls, or the upcoming Joker try to hide in the marketing that they are musicals, as there is a kind of audience that is quite reluctant to this gender. So do you notice this reluctance, and how do you think the end can connect with this audience? Thank you so much.
That one for me or for you, Sina? I'll just say very briefly, at the end, there's no hiding that it's a musical, because it has to be a musical. If it were not a musical, it would be a bleak and scary science fiction story about a family trapped in a bunker trying to survive alone after the world has ended. The fact that it's a musical is what makes it a film about delusion and denial and storytelling. So I think if you were to hide that aspect of the film, it would backfire profoundly, because the audience would come into the film expecting something utterly different than what they get.
I think what we always try to do is to make form and content inform each other completely, or as completely as we can, and that's exactly what we're trying to do here, so no, we're not hiding anything.
Una pregunta ahí.
Hi, first of all, congratulations for your film. The bunker itself feels like another character, creating sort of purgatory for the main character. And I wanted to know how was the creation of the bunker itself during the process. Thank you.
Well, in the very beginning, we were looking at references from bunkers built by billionaires here. We went to look into this missile, these missile
Silos.
yeah, where people actually go living there. They go for holidays there because they don't know what else to do with them. And we quite fast found out that we needed another atmosphere around our family. And since mother is so obsessed and absorbed with having a normal family and a normal life, we decided to create this beautiful home of hers. And she's trying to keep all the salt out all the time. It's not really successful for her. But this, in a way, nature is creeping in. And another thing we found out in a bunker, it can be quite boring to be in a bunker, in a concrete bunker for more than an hour. So we needed to have an exterior. And after being around, how could we make an exterior here? We thought maybe maybe they would live underground in some kind of a mine. And as soon as this thought started, what kind of mine could that be? Mines can be really boring. And then we started looking into salt mines and found some beautiful pictures of ones in Ukraine. There was the first ones, and then we found out that actually in Italy they have some of these beautiful sparkling white salt mines, and we were lucky enough to Joshua insisting on going down there and do our exterior, because everything else is of course built in the studio. It was a mine that was still processing salt. So we had some really challenges there because there were absolutely no light down there. So we had to actually, all the light you see is made by us. It was quite complicated, but it looks beautiful. It's a dull way. We had this. You can really feel you're underground when you're in a mine like this. So we had this, like being on a night shift for 3 weeks. So.
Hay una pregunta aquí.
Hi, my name is Clara. I wanted to ask to the director, why did you decided, she maybe asked like a similar question to it, to why is it a musical? And maybe first I thought that to take out the burden that it is to be living inside of the bunker for the last 20 years. But then maybe I thought that this has to do something with utopia, like the characters, like the mom and the dad. I thought there was 2 moments that they were actually going to get themselves killed. I actually thought 2 of the characters were going to actually commit suicide in this epic act of like finishing a song and then but then they never die, which maybe means that they never even left the bunker to climb. So what was in your mind when you create that kind of metaphor?
Well, I think it's interesting there are these 2 suicidal moments, and the father's jump echoes the son's jump from his song earlier in the film, and then someone else commits suicide, and it's not in song, and it's in a moment of absolute silence. I think there's 2 things I'd just say. I think I've answered some of your initial question earlier, but I would add 2 things. First, in the golden age musicals, the bouncy, buoyant, forward-looking musicals of the 1950s, that I will just note maybe should be called the Dark Age musicals, because they were being produced pretty much in that unique moment in human history when we developed the ability to annihilate ourselves at the push of a button in the 1940s and 50s. So that's when all this optimism sung forth in these soaring strings and woodwinds. So anyways, in those musicals, in those Golden Age Broadway musicals, the sort of cliche, but there's truth to it, is that the characters burst into song when they have a truth that's so passionate and so forceful it can't be contained in dialogue. And I think the end is almost the negative image of that, in the sense that the songs emerge from crises of doubt, moments very often when a character, something that the girl has brought or something that's happening has caused a character, the stories that the character needs to cope with their situation and to live with, to unravel and to fall apart. And then they burst into song to sort of reach for, almost as if they're drowning in the sea, after a ship. Their lies and stories are splintered like a shipwreck, and they're grasping for the fragments of the broken boat, trying to put together a life raft. And when one melody slips from their grasp, they reach for another. And so in the gaps between verse and bridge and chorus, and when they hit the wall and they can't sing, in those little silences, that's where the truth screams through, as I said earlier. So unlike in a Golden Age musical where the songs hold the truth, it's the silence that holds the truth, while the songs are very often these moments of these luminously beautiful, rich, seductive lies. And so when a character commits suicide in song, or flirts with suicide, as Father does, it's in the father's character that, yes, he'd feel bad about himself, he'd feel self-pity, he would fantasize with killing himself when he's confronted with his guilt. But then he's a survivor. He finds new music, a new melody, his sidekick, the butler, to pull him back together. There was one other thing I was going to say, but I forgot. And if I remember it, I'll work it into some other answer. But yeah.
Hola otra vez. Yo quería preguntar.
Hi again. I'd like to talk about the editing process. In the film, I see a little ellipses, and then at the end is much more evident. But I'd like to talk about how was that specific work, whether there was any version which was perhaps longer, or at the end of the day, or definitively, the film as you wanted it to be, obviously. And also, as regards musicals, I would like to ask you, originally, from the outset, it was a musical. That was clear in your mind, was it, Joshua?
I'm so sorry, but you cut out on my machine anyways, at the beginning of your first question. Can you just repeat the beginning? Let's see if I can. Now it's working.
Ahora, yes. He was saying, as regards the editing process, I knew there were the little ellipses, and at the end, there's one that's quite evident, but I'd like to know whether there's any other version, which is perhaps longer, or the film is as you wanted it to be in the editing process.
The film is as I want it to be. And this is, and the ellipses you're talking about is between the fight at the end and the arrival of the baby? Yeah, no, that's always been an epilogue. And that's exactly as I want it to be. And yes, the film was always conceived as a musical. And I think it can only exist as a musical. And I think I'm very proud of that aspect of the film, too, if I'm honest.
Hi, congratulations for the film. I enjoyed it very much. There's a question that comes to mind when I was watching it all the time. That is, the courage of the Nordic and Danish producers to carry out films that are so complex as this film. I was asking whether in the US this project at a given moment would have been done or not, because from Europe, and above all, Germany, Denmark, our friends, they wager in favor of very risky films that at a given moment that you couldn't probably see. But I want to thank you very much. And I'd like to ask that whether you addressed any possibility of whether this could have been sold in the US. And Joshua, I'd like to ask you about the screenplay. How have you done such an enormous piece of work and structure it all? Because it's quite curious and I think quite difficult. Thank you.
Can I?
Yeah, Signe, please. I'll come to.
So I'll answer the production part of your question. It is a 6-country European co-production with Denmark, Sweden, Italy, UK, Ireland, and Germany. And I believe firmly that the freedom we've had is only possible because we have the support of the public institution in each of these countries. The first and foremost, the Danish Film Institute, because that's where it started, but we also have the Swedish Film Institute, the British Film Institute, the regional and national funds in Germany, Italy, and Ireland. And I think it's very special and something we should treasure, that we have public support for art like this. But in this case, we should also say that we have had Neon, our American distributor, on board the project from very, very early on. So it's actually this time a combination of European funds and also American money. And then I should also mention that it couldn't be possible without Euremage, and it couldn't be possible without the Nordic Film and TV Fund and other regional funds. And on top of that, we have a number of executive producers who've also contributed with private equity. So it's a puzzle, like these finance plans usually are, both in documentary, I should say, and in fiction.
And I'll just say about the script, I want to underline something I feel is a theme in what Signe just said, which is that the film is a plea. I remember the other question. And it ties right in, about it being a utopia, because it occurred to me today that actually the film is not only a tragedy, it's a dystopia. And the whole tradition of dystopian stories as a warning for where we're headed is firmly the tradition that we're in. And the idea that what makes it essentially necessarily a musical, to go back to your last question, is that when a dystopia appears to its inhabitants as a utopia, because they're lying to themselves so beautifully, so harmoniously, then you have a story about self-deception, which is why it's a musical. But as the reason I remembered that is because, building on what Signe said, it's a dystopian view of what happens when there's no public sphere, when we just think that our private families, our bank accounts, the interests of multinational companies are enough to create culture and community, and they're really, really, really not. And I think we live at one thing about the film, and I think it is, to answer your question about the script, is that the film is not a satire. It's entirely sincere. It's not a tongue-in-cheek, ironic take on the musical. And I think we live in a time where sincerity is easily dismissed as naivete, and cynicism, despair is camouflaged by cynicism. And despair comes from the fact that we as democratic citizens have lost or surrendered, are willingly every day surrendering our power to multinational corporations and oligarchs. So the power we should have in a democracy, we're giving it away. That leads to despair. And then now we cover that with cynicism. And I think cynicism and despair, finally, are further camouflaged as irony and wit and cleverness and mordancy. And it's all bullshit. If we don't tap into our souls and let ourselves feel, why are we making art?
que una pregunta más.
There's another question here. Joder.
Hi, Jill Pringle for Australia. On a slightly more light-hearted note, George, I wanted to ask you about your musical process. Was there any musicals that inspired you? Did you have a singing coach? Any pop singers that you liked? And how was it?
Well, to follow up on the Aussie connection, Moulin Rouge was a big film for me growing up, by Baz Luhrmann, and we had an incredible singing coach from Tasmania called Fiora Cutler, who helped us all massively. But yeah, I mean, I love a musical, but I would by no means call myself an expert. I mean, we have all the musicals. I grew up in London, so I saw a lot of shows growing up, and I love the theatricality of musicals. I love the sort of, the theatricality more than anything. And the tango scene in Moulin Rouge I found so extraordinary when I watched that when I was about 11, without really understanding it, but just was kind of switched on by it. So I've always kind of been really interested in quite kind of bombastic performances as well. Like John Leguizamo is an actor I really love because of his work with Baz Luhrmann. And the extremity of the son, albeit a very sort of fragile and sensitive character, his circumstances so extreme, it kind of offered up, it was kind of fertile ground for quite an expressive, performance, and that was kind of egged on by the fact that it was within a musical, as well as hopefully making it a grounded, performance as well. So that's the kind of intrigue with the musical, and it was just a pleasure to dive in. And Fiora, genuinely, she helped all of us leaps and bounds. It was extraordinary. It's like a muscle, you work it out. If you have to do stunts for a job, you train and you get stronger. And like this, our voices all got stronger because of Fiora and Josh and Marius and Mark and Shelley and Paulina.
Yeah, maybe I should say that we basically built a music room in every place where we were shooting. So we were shooting in a studio in Ireland first, and then we were shooting in the mine in Sicily, and then finally in Germany. And we brought the music team around with us, and we had a piano player on set who was playing into the ears of the actors while they were singing.
Yeah, and that's also worth saying that I'd say 99% of the singing is live singing. There's some repair that happens when something happens on set, but this is not, lip-synced.
No sé si hay alguna otra pregunta. Si no hay ninguna, yo quería un poco...
I'm not too sure whether there are any questions, but I would like to ask a question. Vis-a-vis the question that's just been asked, I would like to ask about the most specifically musical numbers to the director and also to the editor who's here. The decisions about staging these musical numbers, because there's a particularity that it all happens in interiors, how to choreograph all of these characters in these small spaces, how to stage the musical in moments which are so dramatically intense, and to ask Joshua about whether there's any clear influence of any musicals of any age that you followed as a reference vis-a-vis staging these musical moments in your film. Hope you got all that.
Thank you. My big collaborator in working out the staging was Michał Krichman, the cinematographer. I reached out to Misha early on in the process because I wanted, there's something monumental and patient and so sensitive all at the same time. And the warmth and sincerity and empathy of the film, which I hope touched each of you, is that patience and that warmth and that sensitivity. And then the monumental quality I thought was necessary for a film at the end of the world, for the last human family. And we spent about 5 or 6 months cumulatively, but full time, so over probably a year and a half or a little more, planning the staging of every shot in the film. Initially, we wanted to start with the songs, but they were the hardest. So we started with the spoken scenes, and to find a kind of language that we knew could hold these songs. The songs I knew should not have the many, many cuts and angles of, say, Dancer in the Dark or the film versions of the Bob Fosse musicals. I was really drawn to the kind of golden age, which has bodies moving, dancing, singing in space, where we feel where we see the kind of magic of that unfold. I think dance that's cut intensively, unless the cutting it's so easy to make a cut, and it's so difficult to carve space with moving bodies. So it feels like a cheap addition, like adding MSG to food, to kind of introduce into the choreography cuts unless you're very judicious. So we knew we wanted these long takes, and then because one of the principles from Joshua Schmidt that he taught me as a lyricist was that every phrase of lyric should be as dramatically active as dialogue, and these songs are sung by human beings in crisis. It's the crisis that propels them to sing. Because of that, there would be sung dialogue and sung negotiations, like that, I think, incredible beginning of a song between son and mother, when she's looking at the photo album and she snaps and gets angry at son, and then they have this recovery ritual whose ritual quality is underlined by the fact that it's sung. That I had to think, would I do shot, reverse shot? Would I to hold two people singing to each other? And somehow it just felt, looking at how that had worked in films that I think otherwise are very successful, like Oklahoma and even Umbrellas of Cherbourg, I think when people are unified by a harmonic space, cutting back and forth feels like it felt wrong to me. In the few places where Niels and I tried it, it actually worked better than we thought, so maybe that was a mistake. But that led to these very long choreographed ensemble songs. That song I just mentioned is about 3.5 minutes. It's the whole cast except for father with parts. It moves through the living room and then out into the salt mine. Those were really hard. George taught me about the pressure on the penalty kicker in soccer. I knew nothing about football. I'm so sorry, embarrassed to say, but George got me into it. And I realized that was the pressure on you guys during those takes. If one actor had a break in their voice or fumbled or improvised something that we thought didn't really work, the whole take had to be redone. So it was a 100% commitment to work that way.
No sé si hay alguna pregunta más.
I'm not sure whether there are any further questions. If there are none, just to finish, just mention the following. For Joshua, there's something that it's always in your films, is the idea of representation, of recreation within the story. There are two things in the film that I think connect very well with that idea. One is the little model that's built by George in the film, and the image of a reality that George had, that the son has, because he's been told by his parents. And these works of art that belong obviously to the exterior and that are inside the house, I'd like to know, well, that's a bit continuous. It continues with those ideas in your films that to think about reality, you've got to recreate it, even if it is artificially or through art. Is that something that's continued along the line of some of your films? That's what she thinks. She asks you.
The other example I would just add to that. Thank you so much for that question. The other example I'd add for that is the memoir that the son is writing for the father. And as we're in Spain, and when I released the two documentaries here in San Sebastian, did a program around them, like a little selection of films called The Act of Killing. The Act of Killing was part of it, but then it was a program around the two films. One of the things that was very powerful for me about bringing the films here was the theme of impunity. Mm-hmm. Because, of course, Spain lived through fascism far longer than the rest of Western Europe, with the exception of Portugal, I suppose. And we, what I would add beyond what I've already said is that history is always political. History is always ethical. There's no neutral history. There's no factual neutral history. When a history appears to be neutral, it's complicit with whatever the status quo is, by definition. And so here you have a family that needs more than anything truth, forgiveness, and acceptance. I think, I'll just say on a brief tangent, this is a film that challenges us to think about our response to climate change differently. I think we not only have to look at the problem honestly so that we can change course rather than just continue off the precipice into the abyss. But part of doing that is forgiving ourselves for the damage that we've already done and not just retreating to some idealized notion of how things can be. But if here we have a family that retreating to some notion of an idealized world without humans, an idealized nature without humans. We have to actually instead say, we've caused grave damage, we have to accept it, we have to forgive ourselves, we have to ask forgiveness of the future generations, and we have to change. And we don't have to change just by recycling more personally or going vegan personally. We have to make ourselves vulnerable in the way that one does when one becomes an activist, when one joins with fellow citizens together and puts one's own liberty, perhaps, on the line in an era when the punishments for civil disobedience are becoming more and more draconian. We actually have to take that personal risk and discover our full humanity by joining in solidarity and in the deepest empathy with the full human family to make change. And so here we have this family that desperately needs forgiveness, acceptance, and the truth. We have a son in the family who knows at some level he's been lied to, and someone comes in bearing the gift of truth. And all of the stories, all of the versions of history, the diorama, the artworks, the memoirs, appear for what they are. Comforting lies, comforting illusions. And I think when you're making films as artists, we're telling new stories, we're bringing new stories into the world, which hopefully for those of you who take the act of hope and optimism of letting yourself be touched by those stories sincerely, rather than hiding behind a mask of cynicism and ironic detachment, for those of you who take that leap, we have the incredible privilege of making new ways of thinking and seeing possible. And it's the greatest of honors, but it is only the beginning, because those new ways of seeing, thinking, feeling, I hope, come with you out of this room through your writing, whatever you'll write about the film, but also in your own lives, into the things we do next. So thank you for that question. Let's all go out there and do better next.
Bueno, pues, como no hay más preguntas.
As there are no further questions, this is the end of the press conference. Thank you very much to all of you for being here today, and good luck with your film in the future. Thank you.